Hello, I.
Yes, George. So I guess it's 2 p.m. We can start, right?
Great. Yes.
Right.
Um,
So let me just
all
defer
right.
to you to take it over, George. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Ike, by Tini, our able um, co-host and main host, and the AGI, a member of AGI, Accra. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, we are here to look at an environmentally important topic, which is developing and implementing greenhouse emissions reduction strategies. So as AGI, we have a mandate. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, George. Go ahead, please.
Great. So as AGI, we have a mandate to bring up to speed our members, industry on some of these important topics as far as the global warming is concerned, as far as greenhouse gases reduction emission strategies are concerned. And this webinar is being brought to you by AGI and an Environmental Sustainability Cluster, which comes on every quarter in the year. So this is one of our series which we have been organizing for our members and for the general public. So we have with us our engineer, Wiafe, to help us with this afternoon all-important webinar. So without doing much, I want to quickly introduce Engineer Ismaila Wiafe to who will be taking this afternoon's webinar. All of us. Hello. Yes, I.
Yes, George. Go ahead, please.
All right. So Engineer Ismaila Wiafe is an energy and sustainability expert with 14 years of experience working in international and multicultural environments across the energy, manufacturing, transport and telecom, banking and real estate sector. He is passionate and has been contributing to the promotion and adoption of sustainable energy and environmental practices in Ghana and beyond. He is a technical director and lead energy and sustainability expert for Green Space Energy Solutions. He has worked on several private and development cooperation projects with over 7 years practical experience in assisting organizations in their decarbonization strategy and transmission to net zero. As part of that, he has carried out over 50 energy audits and have been involved in the development of carbon footprint implementation of sustainable energy and decarbonization solutions across industry, commercial and institutional facilities. He has also contributed to developing sustainable energy training curriculums and delivered 15 training courses to over 300 professionals. Engineer Ismaila is specialized in energy efficiency, water efficiency, energy audits, carbon accounting ISO 14064 or greenhouse protocol, decarbonization strategies and implementing energy management system ISO 50001, renewable energy systems optimization, measurements and verification, waste management, sustainable project management, curriculum, circular economy training, curriculum development, and capacity building. It's an internationally certified energy audit, CEA, and a certified industrial energy professional, CIEP, by the Association of Energy Engineers, USA. He has also received one International Energy Professional Award. So this afternoon, we bring this webinar with our main facilitator and presenter being Engineer Ismaila Wiafe. Engineer, good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon, my good friend George and Isaac. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I also want to greet everyone here today in our webinar. I believe so strongly that we are going to have a very insightful webinar. At the end of the webinar, I would like to take questions and I'll try as much as I can and answer all of them. So as you are aware, today I'll be actually delivering a webinar on developing and implementing greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies. I'm sure most of us, to some extent, have understanding of what greenhouse gases are and what actually goes into accounting them across our organizations. But the next thing is, what do you do with all those knowledge and information? And I am here today to share with you practical experiences and insights which I have actually acquired over some time through my line of work and also through experiences on the field. So as part of this webinar, we will briefly look at introduction to greenhouse gas emissions. Then we will zoom into our main topic, where I will start with how to assess greenhouse gas emissions. Then we will look at developing the greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies. Then we will look at implementing the reduction strategies. Then I'll also share with you one case study. In fact, if we had had more time, I would have delved deep into even more than that, but unfortunately, due to limitations of time, we will look at one case study, then we will wrap up. So having said that, I'm sure everybody is aware of climate change. It has been very devastating. We are all, not at ease because of the changes in the weather patterns. And this has actually created a lot of globalization issues, and everyone, want to do something. But organizations are looking at how they can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and contribute to reducing their impact on the environment. So just to give you a brief overview, greenhouse gases, they are just basically gases which traps heat in the atmosphere. So what are these gases? I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge or information about carbon dioxide. In fact, it happened to be one of the largest, contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. And however, beyond that, there are other 6 gases, according to IPCC, which also contribute to greenhouse gases. And these are methane gas, we have the nitrous oxide, then the fluorinated gases, which mostly can be found in air conditioning and refrigeration units or equipment. So we can all testify to the fact that it's very important that we actually limit the release of these gases into the atmosphere so that we don't have so much heat being trapped in the atmosphere, and for that matter, those gases causing the environmental impact that we see. So global temperatures keeps increasing, and it's expected that if everyone don't actually take steps, or organizations or even economies don't actually put in measures to limit our environmental temperature to below 1.5 by 2050, then the Earth will not be habitable. And that the implication is that businesses are going to face a lot of challenges. Even human life is going to face a lot of challenges. Biodiversity will be challenged. and the earth and everything in it will be doomed. So all that we have is our earth, and we must all contribute to ensuring that we reduce the release of these gases into the atmosphere and contribute to, the climate change reduction efforts. So like I mentioned earlier, there are 7 gases that contribute to these, these 7 gases that can be said to be part of greenhouse gases, according to the IPCC. And each of them have their, global warming potential. It's very important that if you want to actually help your organization to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, you need to understand these. And also, this will also help you to actually establish the hotspot of greenhouse gas emissions at your organization so that you can know where to tackle. So when you evaluate all these 7 greenhouse gases, you can see from the table that the one that has the largest global warming potential is sulfur hexafluoride. Most often, our attention always goes on carbon dioxide, but it can be seen clearly that relative to carbon dioxide, sulfur hexafluoride is actually the one contributing to the largest. By the way, if we say global warming potential, what does it mean? It actually is a measure of how much greenhouse gas contribute to global warming relative to carbon dioxide. So if you take, let's say, a gas in your air conditioning system, for instance, if you are doing an R22 gas, or you are doing R134 gas, or R410 gas, or R32 gas, what is its contribution to global warming? In fact, you need to understand that, so that if you are making decisions regarding your air conditioning and refrigeration, you actually select the type of system that has refrigerant with the lowest global warming potential. So we can see that we can't just focus only on carbon dioxide, but we need to also look at the other greenhouse gases as outlined here. So why is it important to reduce our greenhouse gases? Now it is becoming a regulatory imperative that organizations in the banking sector, in fact, banks specifically, from the regulator, Bank of Ghana, they are being required to report on their greenhouse gas emissions. And even for Security and Exchange Commission, any organization that is listed on the stock exchange is required to report on ESG, of which the environmental component in the respect of greenhouse gas is required for reporting. So it is becoming a regulatory compliance requirement, even for organizations that also export to the European markets. It is now becoming imperative that we comply by way of demonstrating what we are doing to ensure the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by our operations. So it is very important that every organization or even professional must pay attention to this, because if organizations are not compliant, they will be, fined, and it has serious financial implications. Then the next importance of why you need to reduce your greenhouse gas is the savings that it brings you. In fact, as we evaluated the greenhouse gases, we looked at carbon dioxide, we look at methane, and etc. And from what we know so far, if you are able to, outline efforts to reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, one of the benefits it brings you is cost savings. So you are reducing emissions attributed to the use of your electricity, or emissions attributed to you, running your generator or your boilers. By so doing, as you reduce your emissions, because of the nexus between the emissions and the energy use, as you reduce emissions, you also save your energy costs. So it brings tremendous benefit as well. The other benefit that it brings is stakeholder expectation. You want to meet your stakeholder expectation. Now, according to studies, most new clients, or even the younger generation, prefer to actually patronize the services or even the products of organizations that are sustainably inclined. So now every organization needs to see that as a competitive advantage so that they can better position themselves and win new clients and even keep the old ones that they have. So all these things put together shows us that it is very important for organizations to consider reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. So I want to just show you how you can assess your greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, it is very, very important that you understand this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to actually put in place strategies or the strategies that you need to actually develop or implement your emission reduction goals. So as you can see, I am just demonstrating to you what you can normally experience at your respective organizations. So your organization will have a boundary, okay, and within that boundary, you have different kind of sources of emissions. So within the boundary, you have sources of emissions, and outside of that boundary, you also have sources of emissions. So what you need to do is that you need to establish or set your organization and operational boundaries. So for your organization, are you only going to look at your head office or you are going to look at your branches? And for your facilities, are you focusing on some department or you are looking at all the departments within the organization? Then when it comes to operational boundaries, you are also looking at the types and sources of emissions at your organization. So you need to actually establish the types of emissions there and also the sources of emissions that you can see. So this is just to use a typical industrial, setting to explain how you can assess your greenhouse gas emissions. So in a typical industrial setting, you usually, when you enter the premises or the facility, you have your offices or administrative block, and you also have the factory floor or the production area. So for the buildings or the administrative block, usually you would need to cool, the staff or even a client that uses the space. And to do that, you need air conditioning or refrigeration units. So just take note of that. Then also, you might also have a fire extinguisher for the purposes of, fire suppression at your facilities. Then when you go to the same facility or premises, you also have maybe a standby generator to provide you backup power. So within the boundary, you have this. Then when you enter the production area, you would require probably a steam for your production process. And because of that, you will need a steam boiler. Then in order for you to carry out material handling at the production floor or even moving finished goods to your warehouses, you will need a forklift to do that. Then in the production area itself, you have the services like the lighting, for instance, which you need for better illumination at your production floor. And also, you also need other energy end uses, which you require for your process. So within the boundary, you can have all these things in addition to your vehicles, which probably you use to take raw materials or deliver finished goods to your clients. So within the organization and within the boundary or the setting, you have this. Then outside of that, you also will have the source of supply from the grid. So either you are relying on direct VRA, or your source of power is from enclave power, or you're on ECG. They are all sources of emissions outside your premises. Then if let's say you have staff that have or own their own vehicles, for instance, those vehicles are not for the organization, but staff actually owns them and they use them to commute in and out of the office or come to work. That also should be of interest to you. Then, of course, if you need to travel, you need to travel outside. Then, no organization, I'm not sure any organization or most organization in Ghana have their own air flights. You would need to actually use a third-party aeroplanes to actually commute from one country to the other, or even within the Then, of course, you have your suppliers supplying you materials for your production. So you need to evaluate to establish the types of emissions and the sources. So having explained to you the boundaries and what you out for. Now let's look at emissions. And if you are doing this, what it implies is that you are actually trying to identify the sources of emissions and the types of emissions in your organization or with respect to your organization. So we look at the three types of or scopes of emissions. So we have the scope 1, the scope 2, and the scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are actually emissions that comes out from sources which you own and you actually generate directly. So if, let's say, you have a vehicle owned by the organization, as you use the vehicle, the emissions from that vehicle becomes a direct emission because you are using it directly, okay, to support your operation. If you have a standby generator, for instance, because you are burning diesel and carbon dioxide and other gas elements are produced, these emissions actually are direct emission. You own this. So that goes under a scope 1 type of emission. Then we also have the scope 2 emissions, which usually you actually don't own it, but we call it like you don't own it, you don't have much control, but you use it for the direct operation of your organization. So if, let's say, you are connected to the grid, either NETCO or ECG or Enclave Power, even VRA Direct, you are using the energy from these third-party suppliers. However, you are not generating it. So this kind of emissions, which is indirect, but you use it, is called a scope 2 emission. Then the last one, or the third type of emission or emission source, is the scope 3. So for this kind of emission, like I indicated in the previous slide, you have your suppliers, using their truck to supply you raw materials for your production, or you have staff who actually owns vehicle and they use that for commuting in and out of office, or probably you use, you travel a lot. You have your senior managers or management traveling, across and wide the globe for business meetings and all that. So all these kind of emissions attributed to these are defined as scope 3 emissions. So you need to actually put all these things together, and that helps you to actually establish the sources and types of emission. So if you are able to assess your greenhouse gas emissions, then the next thing that you need to do is to develop your emissions reduction strategy. So now you are able to actually establish the boundaries. You want to focus on maybe your head office alone, or you want to go beyond the head office and consider all other branches. And beyond that, you are also looking at the types and also the sources of emissions. So you've been able to put all these things together. And the next thing that you need to do is to develop your greenhouse gas emissions. So I just want to show you the steps that you need to take in developing your greenhouse gas emission reduction strategy. The first step that you take is that you need to identify your emissions reduction opportunities. Okay, in the ensuing slide, I've broken it into details, and you will see what you need to do as part of identifying your emissions reduction opportunities. The next thing you need to do is to determine the cost and impact of reducing the emissions. Most often, we are so excited to actually assess our greenhouse gas emissions and also even identify the opportunity. But the question is that, what is the cost? What is the impact? You need to evaluate that. Then the next step that you need to take is that you prioritize the emission reduction measures. So the opportunities that you establish, from experience, when you do the assessment, you will see that some of the emissions are hotspot emissions. In fact, they constitute the largest share of your emission. Let's say that you are a small SME, most often maybe you have some 2-3 machines, your energy consumption is very minimal. However, if you want to assess your greenhouse gas emission, you are able to establish that your scope 3 emissions constitute the largest share of your greenhouse gas emission. So this, by way of establishing that you need to actually prioritize the scope 3 emissions, because your scope 1 and probably your scope 2 emissions are very, very minimal. Then the next step that you need to take is you need to set your emissions reduction target. So now you know the measures you need to take to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. So out of the measures, you have to set target. All right, so look at how you can do that. Then the last step is develop emissions reduction implementation plan. Most often, we start from step 1, and when we get to step 4, that ends it. We don't move to the last step, which is the most important step. You need to have a plan. There must be an action plan. If you are able to do all the 4 and you don't put together an action plan, it means that you are not moving forward. So let's look at how you can identify your emission reduction opportunities. So the first thing you need to do is that you have to carry out a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. I'm sure most of you know how to do that or might have read somewhere or heard about it. So you need to establish all your emission sources, what actually is contributing to your greenhouse gas emissions. If maybe you have, solar PV installations there or solar thermal systems there as well, that they are all reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. So you need to establish your carbon footprint or greenhouse gas footprint by that. So when you are doing that, you take a particular year, okay, and that becomes your baseline year, and you use that to establish your inventory. So you do that using your direct and indirect emissions information, and you establish your inventory. Then the next thing you do as part of identifying emission reduction opportunities is to identify major and minor emission sources. So you evaluate the emission value chain of your organization, of your setup. Does your scope 1 emission is your scope 1 emission constituting the largest share of your emission, or is the scope 2, or is the scope 3? So based on that, then you are able to actually put together strategies to reduce them. And for these major and minor emissions, which ones are the low-hanging fruits? Which ones can you easily implement? Which ones are cheaper to implement? So you need to actually establish those as well. Then one important thing that you need to do is benchmarking. Most often, we are so much in a haste, we are unable to actually establish whether our carbon footprint is good or is bad, or we need to progressively reduce. We are unable to establish that. In fact, we become so excited by seeing our greenhouse gas emission baseline and us deploying measures to reduce without actually checking how we are doing against our peer organization or even industrial standards. If you are able to benchmark, it helps you to know the extent of reduction you can achieve, okay, after defining your greenhouse gas emission baseline. Then the next step you do or you take is evaluate your reduction opportunities. So what are the emission reduction opportunities available to you? It's not about hearing what others have done. If you have done proper assessment of your greenhouse gas emissions, then you should be able to identify the opportunities that are relevant to your organization. I've put together, I think, 7 common opportunities that you can find in most organizations or in organization that is considering reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. The first one is energy efficiency. In fact, most often we feel that our organization is the most latest organization, or our facilities, was recently built, so there is no need to improve energy efficiency. Studies have shown that there is always a good opportunity to save about 20 to 30% if you are considering optimizing your energy uses, or even putting in measures like operational changes or energy conservation for new facilities. And for older facilities, you are likely to save between 30 to 50% through energy efficiency. And take note that if you are able to evaluate your emissions, and like I said, you know what your scope 1 and your scope 2 emissions are, by implementing energy efficiency measures, you are both reducing your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. By the way, currently, when it comes to greenhouse gas emission reporting, scope 1 and scope 2 is mandatory for most countries. Ghana is is an up and coming country in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emission or even reporting. But for now, most organizations across the world are considering reducing their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. The scope 3 emissions usually comes with a lot of complexities. It's difficult to measure, and sometimes it's difficult to actually provide assurance whether what has been provided is accurate or not. But I'm sure as time goes on, more ways of evaluating accuracy in scope 3 emissions will come through, and it will become mandatory for organizations to report on their scope 3 emissions. Then the next opportunity that you can do is space or process optimizations. So if, let's say, you operate a commercial facility, or you are an organization that finds itself in the commercial sector, your building, how are you operating the building? I've had the opportunity of working in a lot of commercial facilities. And in fact, I can say that there is a lot of opportunities to reduce your carbon emissions. One of the ways and the project I have contributed in is optimizing your workspace. So this actually means that you are doing a space functional analysis. So you are evaluating how you use the space, okay, the availability of space and what you do within the space, and whether you really need the space for the work you do. So when you do the space functional analysis, you're able to establish that some spaces or areas are not really required. So if you are able to establish that, you optimize your facility, and you will see that you cut off a lot of space away, and that saves you, because that space that is not required uses energy. It has fugitive emission installations, and also, contributes to your overall greenhouse gas footprint or baseline. So you do that. Then the other opportunity is process optimization. So how are you matching your demand to supply in your industrial facilities? Most often, because of energy waste, there is a lot of energy that is not accounted for, or that is not used. Mind you, you are actually burning fuel to produce all these waste. So if you are able to match your demand with your supply, you are actually eliminating the waste or the energy loss, and you are cutting down your greenhouse gas emission. Then one other important reduction opportunity, which most often people don't pay attention to, is HVAC. So as I shared with you in assessing the greenhouse gas emission at your facilities, we saw that air conditioning plays a lot of role. And when it comes to the fluorinated gases, they actually constitute the largest share of the global warming potential of the greenhouse gases. So fluorinated gases are very, 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 very key when it comes to reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. So if now that we are in this session, your organization or your facilities is made up of air conditioners with R22 refrigerant, you should then start on putting together strategies to get management to actually buy in for you to replace them to either R410A or even the latest refrigerant, which is R32, applicable to most, room air conditioners or floor standing units and so on and so forth. Or beyond that, you can also consider water cooled chillers. So if, let's say, your organization is considering maybe putting up a new head office or a new facility that has so much heat load, and for that matter, you require high cooling capacity to actually deal with that. The best way to actually reduce your greenhouse gas emissions upfront is to consider water-cooled air conditioning system or water-cooled chillers, because here in this case, the large amount of refrigerant is eliminated and substituted with water. And you know that water has very minimal, impact in terms of greenhouse gas emission, if not zero. So these are some of the things that you can do, or you can consider if you are replacing from R22 gas air conditioners, you have to consider air conditioners with refrigerant having low global warming potential. Then the next opportunity you look at is renewable energy. I wouldn't overemphasize this. I'm sure most of you are aware, and you even have some installed at your facilities. Then supply chain. So like I said, if you are evaluating your greenhouse gas emissions, you've looked at the boundaries, you have also looked at your emission types and the sources. The scope 3 emission that you mostly ignore is supply chain. So for you have suppliers bringing you maybe papers, they bring you food, you have food vendors, they cook and bring to your facility and serve you. You have a lot of suppliers coming through to help your business grow. All these suppliers emit greenhouse gas emissions through their operations. So you need to also focus in this area, especially if you are able to establish that the scope 3 emissions constitute the largest share of your emission, or it is the hotspot of your greenhouse gas, then you need to pay a lot of attention to the supply chain of your organization. Then transportation. So what do you want to do if, let's say, most of your fleets are very old, they are diesel powered, or probably you do a lot of travels for meetings, or maybe your staff, most of them have vehicles, so everybody wants to come to work with their vehicles. What strategy can you put? In fact, this presents a very good opportunity, because if you are promoting hybrid working, staff will not always be coming to work every day in the week. Probably you are doing twice office and 3 times work from home, or thrice office, 2 times work from home. And anytime they are working from home, their vehicles are not hitting the roads to your office, and you are reducing the emissions from their vehicles. Then if, let's say, you do a lot of in-person meetings, you travel, intercity travels, or even out of country travels, you can consider minimizing this and substituting it with teleconferencing. All those reduces your greenhouse gas emission. Then the last one is waste management. So one would say, why do you have this here? In fact, this waste management actually falls under scope 3 emissions. And when you produce waste, depending on the type of waste, when these wastes find themselves at the dump site, they produce methane gases, and beyond that, there are other gases that they also produce, depending on the type of waste. If, let's say, you are after you replace your air conditioners from R22 gas to R410. And these R22 gas air conditioners find themselves at the dump site. One way or the other, these gases can escape into the atmosphere, and this contribute to global warming. So beyond the methane gas, you can also have fluorinated gases also outside the gas. So you need to evaluate all these things, and these present you a very good opportunity to reduce your greenhouse gas emission. Then determine the cost and impact. So with the opportunities that you have identified, what is the
Hello, engineer.
In fact, application to secure approval is not done properly. So you need to actually establish this so that when you are meeting management or you are going for management approval, you have your cost, you have the impact, and management can actually understand and give you the needed support. So what do you do to establish the cost and the impact? The first thing is you have to evaluate the emissions reduction potential. So if let's say you are looking at your scope 1 emissions, let me just use, let's say, a facility that has a steam boiler, for instance. So if you look at your the steam boiler, which falls under the steam boiler, which is a source that falls under the scope 1. Now, the question is that what is the emission reduction potential? Is the boiler a very old boiler with efficiency reduced considerably? Is it the latest boiler? What type of fuel does the boiler use? Is there any opportunity to convert the type of fuel it used to another form? Some boilers have the ability to have their burners, converted, or even they have the capability of using different types of fuel on them. So you need to evaluate all that. So when you have that, then that helps you to actually establish the potential. So if, let's say, you are considering initially you are considering replacing your very old steam boiler to, let's say, a gas boiler, for instance, you need to evaluate this to check. You want to check whether with the old boiler, is there an opportunity to maybe convert it without necessarily replacing the boiler, converting it to use another fuel. So if the boiler uses RFO or HFO, is there an opportunity to convert it to a gas, a burner type of boiler? If that opportunity is there, why do you want to replace the entire boiler? So you do that to actually establish the potential. Then the other thing you need to do is establish the cost. So if you want to convert your RFO boiler, that very old boiler, to maybe a gas boiler, what is the cost? So you look at the cost of doing the retrofitting against the cost of buying a new one. If the boiler is very old, the issue of inefficiency is there, is very, very, very inherent. So will you that can convert that to just then a intensive project, or it's just a low-hanging fruit which you can implement without a lot of justification, a lot of barriers. So you evaluate the type of capex that you are dealing with, and based on that, you establish the timeline. Because for a very high cost project, usually it's most often a mid-term to long-term action that you need to put in place, because it will need to go through several levels of approvals before you can actually secure buy-in from management. And beyond that, too, supply chain will have to come in, and it takes a lot of time. And if management even that don't have the budget, they would need to actually either go to the market to seek for funding, or if they are considering internally generated funds, they would have to give themselves some time to get the needed capital to run the project. So you have to factor in all these things to determine the timeline for implementing the measures. Then you have to prioritize the emissions reduction measures. So you have the various type of emissions. Take note that I made mention that you need to establish your emission hotspots. So what are the major emissions? What are the minor emissions? So when you have these things, you carry out your cost and impact analysis, and based on that, you prioritize them. But if you want to prioritize, there is a way you can do that can help you establish which one to actually rank first and which one should be the last. So you do this, you put together, there are several ways to do prioritization anyway. I don't want to go into details, but I just want you to evaluate your opportunities or measures based on these 5 criteria, very important criteria. So the first one is, what is the complexity of implementing the opportunity or implementing the emissions reduction measure? Some of the measures are very, very much complicated. You may not have technical expertise in-house to run them. Some of them you may have to rely on external consultants to implement. Some of them, due to the nature of your process or your facility, you need to do a lot of engineering retrofitting to get them, implemented. So it comes with a lot of complexities. So you have to do that and establish the level of complexity you'll be dealing with if you are implementing them. Then the next thing is impact on operations. How is it going to impact on your operation? If, let's say, you have a commercial building with an air handling unit, for instance, and for your air handling unit, you run the air handling unit maybe 12 hours a day. And from your observation, you can actually, reduce the operating hours of your air handling unit to maybe 8 hours. However, you establish that some of your, staff stay late into the night before they leave. So if you are going to actually put off your air conditioning or schedule it to work within 8 hours, there will be a lot of nuances or a lot of concern from staff. So how will staff take that? And how will it impact on health and safety? And by so doing, productivity, how is it going to impact? When it goes to the industry, if you are implementing a measure, for instance, like the boiler, or you are replacing a compressed air systems, for instance, how is it going to impact on your operation? You need to actually evaluate that. So I have here a diagram which you can actually use to do that. So you are evaluating it from the easiest to the most difficult, or from the lowest cost to the highest cost. And you can see that as you move from the easiest to the difficult, you encounter a lot of barriers. If a measure is easy to implement, barriers usually are very minimal. But as they become difficult, you encounter a lot of barriers. That's why it's very important that stakeholder engagement is key if you are looking to reducing your greenhouse gas emission. Then non-emission reduction benefits. Most often we are focused on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that you can reduce with a measure or measures. We don't think about non-emission reduction benefits like the impact on productivity, the impact on health and safety, the impact on deliverables. If you can quantify all these things, it helps you to actually prioritize the emission reduction. And if you are going for buy-in from stakeholders or management, it makes it easy for you to secure their approval. Then stakeholder requirements. So what are the expectations from management or stakeholders? So if, let's say, you want to implement a measure in a factory, have you engaged the production manager? Have you engaged the maintenance manager? Because whatever that you are going to do could have implications. You need to discuss with them so that with them, they know what goes on in their space. They can advise you and even help you in the implementation. So you need to establish their requirements and align with them so that together with them, you can move forward. Then also, what will be the timeline? So you evaluate your emission reduction measures with these important criteria And if you are able to do that, you combine that with financial returns. And when you have that justification, you can then prioritize your measure and know which one you will start first and which one you start second and which ones will be the last. So the next thing that I want to share with you is setting your greenhouse gas emission reduction target. In fact, if you are able to prioritize the emission reduction measures and you don't know how to approach the target setting, then you need to really actually pay attention to this, because there are three ways you can actually set your target. You can decide to align it to, the science-based target, which is generally, we are aware that globally we are looking to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in 2030 and net zero by 2050. In Ghana, I think I saw our net zero strategy to be around 2060 or so. But you see, if you are setting targets as an organization, especially if you want to be ambitious, okay, in your target settings in terms of reducing your greenhouse gas emission, I will always recommend you to consider the science-based target. In fact, when you are ambitious with your target setting and you are stretching, it helps you to go faster than just being, being less ambitious and just considering the other type of target setting, which I will just take you through briefly. So for the science-based, there are three types of target settings you can consider. We have the science-based targets, we have the intensity-based targets, and the absolute reduction targets. By the way, in setting your targets, the target must follow the SMART framework. The target must be specific, it must be measurable, it must be achievable, it must be relevant and time-bound. So what do? Are you going to consider the science-based targets, or you are going to look at the intensity-based targets or the absolute reduction targets? However, if you are actually going to establish the targets, you need to also, determine the emissions reduction potentials. So with the potentials in mind, you can actually define your target. So with a science-based target, you want to align your emission reduction goals with the latest climate science to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or well below 2 degrees Celsius. So if you are able to evaluate your greenhouse gas emissions potential, you have your greenhouse gas emission baseline, then you can then use this target setting strategy to actually define your targets for your organization. So if you have already established your baseline and you are setting targets, you can say that by 2030, my organization or company ABC will reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. So company ABC intends reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in 2030. Then by 2050, we transition to net zero. That is a science-based target set. Then if you are looking at intensity-based targets, you are actually establishing targets based on emissions per unit of output. So per your production or per your organization setting, what is your carbon footprint? Okay, so it's like you are for the amount of output that you produce, you want to know how much emissions that actually led to that. So you put in place a target setting which focuses on your emissions per unit output or even per unit revenue. Or you can use other business, relevant business metrics to do that. So for this example, I'm saying that you can set a target, an intensity-based target, like you want to reduce your CO2 per unit of output by maybe 10,000 or maybe 1,000 metric tons of CO2 in that manner. So you put in place this type of target, and for this type of target setting, you can look at the respective product ranges that you have. So you can, if let's say you produce dry fruits or maybe you produce bars of iron and different forms of bars of iron, you can consider setting intensity base for each of them. Or if you are looking at the overall or the global organization, you can also look at setting this type of specific base targets. Then the next target setting strategy or way you can look at it, the absolute reduction. So for this one, you can say that by 2025 or 2024, by the end of 2025 or by the end of 2024, I want to reduce my greenhouse gas emissions by maybe 5% or 10% or 20%. Okay. And you are doing this based on your evaluation of the potentials. So you are using percentage reduction to actually set your target. And this across the three target setting, you can consider any depending on what your organization wants to do, or depending on the policies available at the organization, or depending on the appetite of your management to actually reduce their emissions. Then the next thing that I want to share with you is develop your emissions reduction implementation plan. So you have your targets, all right? Now, with a target, what do you need to do to ensure that you achieve your targets? That is the action plan. So what you do is that you have to define how the emission reduction targets will be met. So what are you going to do to actually meet the emission reduction target? Are you going to put together a team that will oversee the greenhouse gas emissions? If you are putting together a team to do that, what data are they going to use? Are you going to evaluate together with them the greenhouse gas emissions baseline and the emission reduction potentials? So all that you are doing is you are putting together strategy, to actually achieve your target. Then in terms of reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, the measures or the potentials that you have actually established, what will go into it? What kind of project will you need to embark on to achieve that? I know organizations usually probably will say, okay, when we evaluated our greenhouse gas emissions, the various scope of emissions, to us, we think that scope 1 is our hotspot. Okay, so as part of as part of reducing our scope 1 emission, we want to evaluate all the standby generators across our facilities. We want to evaluate whether they are oversized or not, and by that evaluation, if the organization is able to evaluate whether they are oversized and the generator sets or the standby generator have reached their end of life, it means that if they are considering procuring new ones, they will look at an optimized capacity. And if you are able to actually optimize or get a smaller size genset against the inefficiency bigger size genset, it means that your fuel consumption is going to reduce. And if you are reducing fuel consumption, it means that you are reducing your greenhouse gas emissions due to carbon dioxide or nitrous oxide or whatever. So when you are doing that, it means that you are actually heading towards reaching your targets. So you define the kind of projects that you need to actually embark on to reach your targets. Then, of course, what are the financial implications? You need to also establish that. Then, beyond that, you look at the time frame. So with a generator example that I gave, for instance, so you do your evaluation, your generators across your branches or your facilities are over 10 years, some are even 20 years and plus. And when you actually evaluated their operation, you realize that they are oversized, way oversized. So you need to put in place a strategy to phase out the generators because of their high capex nature. In fact, no organization or no management will just release money for you to replace everything at a go. You need to have a strategy, maybe a 5-year strategy or a 3-year strategy to replace the generator sets in phases. And you put in place that time frame to get that done in meeting your emission reduction target. Then which people will be responsible? So I started by talking about maybe setting up a team. If let's say you are the facilities manager or the maintenance manager or the production manager or even the energy manager, you can't do it alone. You need to have a team. And for the team, you need to get people who really are key decision makers, people that have the technical expertise. Sometimes you want to even bring people in HR or maybe people in account and finance, in procurement, not only limiting the team to engineering. Then also, when it comes to senior managers, who are you considering being part of the setup? Because, of course, if you are able to set up your team down there, you need to get buy-in from your bosses up there. So you need to pen down those who will be responsible in helping you to actually achieve the target. Then the next or final step is, after you have done all this, the next thing you do is engage and seek support from stakeholders. In fact, the stakeholders actually could be your management. If, let's say, beyond your management, you have a board and even you have shareholders, all these people become your stakeholders. And stakeholders, if you carry the information to your management will also carry it to the board, and the board will also carry it to shareholders. If maybe your organization have shareholders, that will go into that. And you see that you've gone through the process and you have been able to secure approval. So the next thing that you do is to put the action plan to work. So you are going to implement your greenhouse gas emission reduction strategy. All right. So here you do what I say. I've put together the 6-point steps that you take to implement your greenhouse gas emission reductions. The first thing you need to do is set goals. In fact, when it comes to Ghana, because the need for greenhouse gas emission reduction is not well regulated, it's voluntary in nature. Most organizations don't have policies to support. In fact, organizations that even have environmental policies or energy management policies don't really have the inclusion of greenhouse gas emission reduction. So if you are an organization that already have environmental related policy, you should be considering including greenhouse gas emission reduction as part of that policy, so that becomes a company-wide document that management has approved, so that the team that will be running the implementation of the greenhouse gas emission reduction will actually be backed by a document and get the needed support from everyone within the organization. So you must commit to a policy and establish ambitious yet achievable targets. So if I'm saying this, then I mean that you need to be considering the science-based target structure. Then the next thing you need to do is put together your action planning into work. So outline specific initiatives. So what are the initiatives? Are you looking at energy efficiency? What do you want to do under energy efficiency? Are you going to actually replace your old boiler or your old water pump or your inefficient water pump with new ones? Are you going to maybe install variable speed drives on your motor? Are you considering any energy efficiency initiative? Well, beyond that, how about your waste management? What are you going to do about it? What about your renewable energy inclusion to your energy mix? What are you doing about it? When it comes to your supply chain, what are you doing about it? What specific initiatives? So you need to list all of them and put them together under your action planning. Then the timelines. So when you list the initiative, you put along the initiative the timelines to implement that. Then who will be responsible? So if, let's say, you happen to find yourself as the building manager or the facilities manager, for instance, you have a team. And if you have been able to get them to understand what you want to do, you need to assign responsibilities. Then if you find yourself in an industrial setting as well, you need to also assign responsibilities and get each of them to support the implementation as per the initiatives that you have outlined. Then the resource allocation. Most often, when buy-in is secured from management, everybody just goes to sleep. We don't chase for availability of funds to get the project implemented. Sometimes when we talk about resource allocation, we always limit ourselves to funds. It goes beyond that. Sometimes you will need capacity building. So if maybe in your organization, you don't have the competence or you don't have competence people to actually run this program, you would probably consider getting people to be trained, okay? And when they acquire the necessary training, they can then support you. But beyond that, if let's say you're having challenges in terms of getting certain some of the work done the way you want it to be done, you want to avoid the likelihood of greenwashing, then you probably may want to engage an external consultant or an expert to help you do that. In fact, for the expert or consultant, the person comes with the needed experience and expertise and also integrity to help you set up a very good program. So you can put this under resource allocation. Then also stakeholder engagement. So this is the time where you are going to maybe send a broadcast to everyone within the organization that, hi guys, we are now considering transition to net zero by maybe 2050. As part of that, we are doing A, B, C, D, and E, and we expect every one of you to support us. So you have circulated the information to the employees. If you can't do the broadcast, you can paste notices on your notice board as well, or doing toolbox talks, you can share that information as well. Then everybody will be aware. Then for your supply chain team you make greenhouse gas emission a criteria. So anytime they are requesting for proposals or requesting for quotes, for instance, you evaluate, your vendors or those who tender according to the criteria. So you make this a criteria in as part of supporting the drive of you implementing a greenhouse gas emission reduction. Then when it comes to HR too, as part of their onboarding, new staff onboarding, you would want to make you maybe find a way and let new staff or employees be aware of what you are doing as an organization as part of your greenhouse gas emission reduction. So you see that everybody is important and all hands must be on deck to ensure that you successfully implement the program. Then you must have your timelines and milestones, okay? So when you are implementing, you are looking at when are you going to start the implementation? Are you going to start the implementation by end of this year or early part of next year? You have to have that documented, okay, and well circulated to all the stakeholders. Then when is target expected to be achieved? So when are you expecting to achieve your target? So for the various kind of opportunities, depending on which ones are easy to implement, which ones are cheaper, which ones are more, capital intensive, the target you will achieve by implementing these measures. So you put in place the information, you circulate the information, and you put in place measures to make sure that you achieve the target that you are expecting. And if you are unable to achieve, it gives you opportunity to review what you have done, because you may most often when we set targets, we don't necessarily achieve ditto. So if you don't achieve your target, you need to review what did you do wrong, which part of the program worked well, which part didn't work well, what were the bottlenecks. You need to do detailed evaluation or review of your program after you actually check whether you achieve your target or not. But to be able to do your review, you need to actually monitor the program. You need to submit reporting. Some organization will have management meeting every half yearly or annually. And because sustainability is key, you'll be required to actually report on progress. So if you are not monitoring the program, okay, how will you be able to actually report to management? So you need to monitor. So when you are monitoring, it means you are carrying out measurements, you are doing a lot of engagement, you are receiving feedback, you are within, as part of your monitoring, you are carrying out improvement measures. This is a live work. So it's not that you just implement and you go and sleep. You have to do a lot of monitoring. As you monitor, you put together record, you put together data, and that forms your report. And with your report, it gives you information for you to actually review progress of the implementation. So I just want us to just look at this case study from Microsoft. I wish I had a lot of time so that beyond this, we would have gone, we would have dived deep into how you go about your greenhouse gas emission by way of practicalizing all that I have said. But Microsoft, carbon negative pledge is very, very intriguing. And I believe that, though Microsoft is a very big organization, I think that their carbon negative pledge can challenge every one of us here on the call, and it will give us the needed drive to go back to our organization and start working. So what has Microsoft done? So they are saying that Microsoft, a leading technology company, has set an ambitious goal to be carbon negative by 2030. So you see, if you are taking your mind back to the science-based targets, what it said was that we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in 2030. However, by this pledge, Microsoft has gone beyond that and is considering becoming carbon negative by 2030. And what does it mean? It means that you are removing more carbon from the atmosphere than you emit. So before you be able to do this, you need to actually establish your carbon footprint, or your greenhouse gas emissions baseline. So when you know your greenhouse gas emission baseline, you evaluate the opportunities to actually reduce or transition to net zero. Then beyond you transitioning to net zero, what else can you do to even remove more carbon beyond your organization boundary? So that is what Microsoft intend doing. Then the next thing that they are doing is they have put in place a comprehensive plan to achieve the goal. So you don't just say it, but you put in place measures or a plan. You must have an action plan to achieve the goal. And one of the things they are focusing on is they are looking at renewable energy. So they want to invest in renewable energy. They want to also improve on their energy efficiency, and they are developing new technologies to reduce carbon emissions. I'm sure they are also focusing on their supply chain because Microsoft relies a lot on third parties to supply them raw material. One thing that also can be done is that, let's say for your organization, for instance, you have production related and non-production related assets. So production related assets could be your boiler, your compressed air systems, your material handling, equipment, your process equipment. Some of you, because of the need to back up your process, you always buy them in spare. So take note, when you stock more than you need, or you stock when not necessary, it means that you have incurred emission generated from your supplier. So you have your supplier having to produce that spare that you have, generating emissions. And these emissions have been generated and you went to buy and stock it. So you see that you are contributing to emissions, scope 3 emissions, one way or the other. So you need to also pay attention to this very well. So you will have to evaluate your spare parts or inventory of your stocks. And as part of your decarbonization drive, you look at how best you can do that so that you don't overly, increase your scope 3 emission. Then the last thing they are doing is that the company has also committed to offsetting all of its historical carbon emissions by 2050. I think Microsoft is overly ambitious. But take note, they have this pledge because management has supported and they have a policy in place. And this policy is justified by a very viable emission reduction plan or strategy. You can't be over ambitious or ambitious if you don't really know what you are doing. So they are considering offsetting all of their historical carbon emissions by 2050. So by taking these steps, Microsoft is demonstrating its commitment to sustainability and setting a high bar for companies to transition in the technology sector. So Microsoft finds itself in the technology sector. Now the question is, which sector does the organization find itself? Do you happen to be in a real estate sector? Do you happen to be in a banking and finance sector? Do you happen to be in a manufacturing sector, in a transport sector? You can do as Microsoft has done. Maybe you wouldn't necessarily have to be overly ambitious, but you need to actually start from somewhere. So once I bring my presentation to a close, I just want you to know that reducing your greenhouse gas emissions is not just an environmental requirement. It's not just an environmental requirement, but you should see it as a strategic business opportunity. Then beyond that, reducing your greenhouse gas emissions actually positions you to improve your financial performance. Okay, it also helps you gain a competitive edge. And when leaders in sustainability are being mentioned, your organization can find its name. So I want to challenge everyone here today in this call or on this call that it is time for all of us to start work. We need to actually carry out our inventories. We need to, establish our emission reduction measures, and we need to put in place action plans, okay, to reduce these emissions. And all of us must put our hands to make sure that the action plans work to actually secure our targets. Thank you very much. I'm sure we have some few minutes to take some questions. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any inquiry too. You can reach out to me by phone or through my email. Thank you, and over to you, Isaac.
Thank you, Engineer Wiafe. That was very insightful. Isaac, are you online? Yeah, so it's time for us to take questions and answers, Q&A. So our participants online, you can start dropping your questions. And our engineer is still here with us to do justice to that. Q&A.
Yes, please, if you have any question, kindly raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question.
So hello,
Yes.
So can we have this announcement passed through?
I'm here, yes. I have not seen anyone raising their hand yet.
Okay, so
okay.
we have some announcement.
I think there's a comment from Paulina.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Paulina. So everything was crystal clear to you. Hopefully that should be the same for everyone. But we would still like to hear from the rest. Key lessons we have picked from the presentation and our next steps. Okay, Mr. Ose, oh, sorry, it's actually a lady. Emanuela, kindly unmute and ask your question. Emanuela, you can unmute. Hello, Emanuela. Yeah. Hello, George. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Right.
Yes, I think, yeah. We have announcement to make. It's actually an invitation to our participants online in respect to our next cluster meeting, which is coming on the 29th of this month, which is on Monday. Our next cluster meeting, that's the AGI Environmental Sustainability Cluster meeting, will be coming on the 29th of July at the Coconut Grove Regent Hotel, Accra. So that's the short announcement we have for all of us here. So we are inviting everyone to be a part of this meeting.
Yes, so the invitation for that meeting will be shared to all of us by email. I believe before we join this meeting, we all registered by email. So the invite for that cluster meeting will be shared to every participant. And also just a quick announcement from myself. So the Energy Service Center at the AGI, we are also ready to support your companies to develop your carbon inventory and develop your roadmap for decarbonization. We have been providing the support to companies, a number of companies. We train their personnel and assist them to be able to take stock of their carbon emissions. So that is a support service that we can provide to you as a member company of AGI or any industrial or commercial company at all. So kindly reach out to us and we'll be glad to support. Apart from that, also we provide support in terms of energy reduction services. So we do energy audit support services here. ISO 50001 implementation support. You can contact us and we will be glad to support your company with that. In terms of solar and other RE project development support also, we can come in and support your company with that. So we are ever ready to come in and provide support to your company. Kindly just reach out to us by all social media platforms, AGI Energy Service Center, and then you reach out to us. Is there any question? I've still not seen any hand. Emmanuel, are you able to unmute? All right, maybe we'll just move to somebody else. Please, if there is a question, kindly raise your hand and just unmute it.
Can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
Yes. Ismail, thank you for the presentation. So I just wanted to ask you, basically, what has been your experience in the Ghanaian market in respect of the interest or desire of companies to want to set up carbon programs to reduce their emissions, etc. Is this something that companies are already aware? And though you said it's a voluntary activity in Ghana now, it's not mandated by government, but do you find that there is interest generally in companies to want to do these things? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, there is a growing interest now. Like Isaac indicated that they've been running a series of training programs in greenhouse gas emissions inventory and all that. And from what I've seen so far, there is a lot of interest with a lot of professionals participating in these training programs. Though we happen to find ourselves in the voluntary markets, but it looks like everybody is getting ready for what lies ahead. What lies ahead, and I think that is the most important thing because we can't afford to wait. And as you are aware, globally is a very, very topical issue, and it is becoming a global problem that requires a global solution. So nobody is actually allowing themselves to be left behind. So that is just my response to your question.
Thank you, Engineer.
And a quick follow-up to that one. So we are an energy services company involved more on the solar energy side for commercial and industrial customers. If we are going to consider offering such services to companies, what would you advise in terms of the first steps to take, and how do we position ourselves in the market?
Well, let me leave this to Isaac. Maybe Isaac would want to take this up.
Right. I believe that is Mr. Tori Cancer, right? Mark Jones Energy, even though the handle is Emanuela.
Oh, is that so?
Mr. Jones, that's you, right?
That's accurate.
I think so. He's the one.
Right. The voice gives you away. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, for as I said earlier, we are the Energy Service Center. We have recently started providing support to companies, both those that want to implement this in their companies, as the commercial and industrial companies, and also the service providers, the supply side, those of you interested. We've actually run one training for service providers to be able to understand the area and also package it as a service to companies, a support service to companies. So I believe you can still reach out, and then we'll talk. There are series more trainings coming up, and then you can participate. And of course, the good thing is that it comes with backstopping for you to practicalize some of the things and then develop your capability. So we are here to support you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Let me go to Robert. Mr. Donkov, kindly unmute yourself here. Robert, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh my God. Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
It's better.
Good.
I think
I just want to know if the slides. Hello, please. I want to know if the slides and recordings will be made available to us.
Right. So for the recording, we will upload it on our YouTube handle, and we'll share the handle by email to all of you. For the slide, Engineer Wiafe, are we making the slide available to them, or is proprietary?
Yeah, the slide is proprietary. I'm sure the recordings suffices, but if beyond that anybody needs any clarity or any further information, you can reach out to me.
Thank you. All right, I believe you're okay.
Yes.
Yes. So any other hands? I don't see that yet. Robert,
Hello.
kindly mute yourself. All right.
Hello.
Who is that? Ben? That's Ben, right?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
There are some questions on the chat box.
Robert. Okay. All right, Ben, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if I may help Ben, I've seen his question in the chat box. He said, what is the APA's target date for R22 elimination in Ghana? In fact, this should have been 2020. This should have been 2020, but unfortunately, things have delayed a bit. I would have to actually confirm or check the new timelines. But if you happen to have these refrigerants, you happen to have air conditioning refrigeration system using the R22. Now, with this type of technology, they are also very inefficient compared to the newer technologies or the inverter that we know, which uses the most the lowest or the low gas with low global warming potential. So you will be losing actually if you are not taking steps, replacing these R22 air conditioned refrigeration units with the latest technology.
Thank you, Engineer Wiafe. Please, is there any other question? It's 3:30 now. I guess we have exhausted the time, but if we have some questions, we could do some 10 minutes over time and then we close. George, are you there?
Hello, hi. Yes.
Yes. So I
Yeah,
don't
so
see any hand up again. So yeah.
I think before we draw the cases down, we need to let our participants know that in the upcoming next cluster meeting, we'll have the practical session of this presentation. Yeah, and so they should avail themselves for the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just reiterate again. So the cluster meeting is on 29th, right?
Yes.
Yes. And we will share the link for registration by email, the mails that we have all provided when we register, that we can register and participate in that. It will come off at the Coconut Group. During that cluster meeting, there will be practical demonstration of the whatever we have learned here. So we expect to see all of you at the cluster meeting. Is Mary online? I don't see her again. She was here. Okay, she's not around. So George, maybe I'll just, since you are the main host, you just give it. Okay, Augustine, I see your hand raised. I didn't even know you are here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, I'm here. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, so with the cluster meeting, is there going to be any fee or is free?
Oh no, it's open, it's free. There
Okay.
is no fee at all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please, the date is what? On 29th, right?
Yes, 29.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Will it be online as well?
I don't know if George, you are the main coordinator for that. Will it be online?
So we would see if that will be possible. But because we have practical sessions, we having practical sessions, we will then teach everyone to be present in-house so that we can learn something. Yeah. So we'll try.
All right.
Thank you.
Welcome. So 29th is Monday. George, it's Monday. Monday. All right. George, is that all?
Yeah, so from your side, if you are okay, then we can draw down the curtain.
Right.
We want to thank everyone who participated, especially our engineer and resource person, Ismaila Wiafe. Yes, that was very insightful. And we hope to meet you next week at the cluster meeting in Coconut Group Regency Hotel. So thank you everyone for participating. Over to you, Ike.
Thank you, George. George chairs the energy subgroup of the Environmental Sustainability Cluster. Thank you, Engineer Wiafe. You have been a helpful resource, always, coming to our aid whenever we call for you. Thank you very much for the presentation this afternoon. And And thank you everyone for participating. Be on the lookout for more of these webinars. We will come up more of this. We will tackle other topics along the line of sustainability in terms of regulation and all of that. So be on the lookout to communicate via the same medium and also on our social media platforms. Kindly do to follow us on all our social media platforms. You can look for Association of Ghana Industries or AGI Energy Service Center, whichever one, and follow them, and you get to be part of our events. Thank you, and let's have a good day.
Thank you very much.